Welcome back to another episode of
What You Say.
What Does George Say?
Oh, that you only meant well.
To your questions, what
you say.
does George say?
That it's all for the best.
I know it's the worst, but it's awesome as well. This is me actually answering some of your questions, and this is the second one that I've done. I'm recording a bunch of these. I like to kind of schedule these throughout the year, and trying to do this every Thursday in the month of January and see how it goes. But if you want your question answered, I do have a form down below, and you can actually submit a question. The people that their questions are answered, and I get a podcast out of it, I'm going to send you a book. But you can also comment your question as well. I'd love that because maybe I might not have the answer, but someone else reading the comments might have the answer. So if you can comment down below, what's a question you have on education, innovation, leadership, teaching and learning? Kind of in my wheelhouse. Don't ask me stuff that you're like, this guy has no clue. Ask people that, that know their stuff. So I think that's, I would love to. And if you could like and subscribe, that's like my 2025 goal is to get more people interacting with this page. So I do want to answer this question, and I got some notes here and a blog post actually that might supplement this too. And I apologize if I don't mention or if I don't say your name. And by the way, I will only say your name if I don't think you're going to get in trouble. So you can answer those questions that, like about your staff, whatever. And I'll use my discretion. But the last one, if you check out last week's episode on Thursday, I didn't say the person's name because I thought this person can get in trouble for asking this, but it's a question I think that should be answered. And a lot of people have the same question. So this one is from Paul Stambaugh. And Paul, I hope I'm saying your name right. And if you're listening, you better like and subscribe if you don't already. So he is from Arkansas and asked a really great question. I got some thought on this. And here is Paul's question. How are our teachers to deal with the current reality of student non-retention of learning and information? They might have it at the end of class, but sadly, it is gone by the next class. So now, when I do these questions and answers, I always do this in the workshops. I really try to facilitate based on what the group is asking. If Paul was here, I'd say, okay, give me some more information, give me some more context. And, there might be something going on that I don't necessarily understand. But since it's just a question, I'm going to answer it based on my interpretation of the question. I honestly don't know if Paul teaches at the elementary level, the middle school level, the high school level. So I'm going to try to cover, a gamut. First time I've ever used the word gamut in my podcast of ideas here. So first of all, I think the retention, there is an importance of this. And I would kind of get a connection of how this is the basics. And I'll give you some context. I'm trying to learn to play the piano. And I've been practicing over the last year. And you just have to practice, right? You don't get into the really hard songs until you just have kind of the basics down. And it's the same with anything in learning. You do have to really kind of hone in on the basics. And as much as I talk about innovation, I'm a huge believer in actually really developing the basics. And the analogy that I often give is those jazz musicians that are known as the best in the field have the ability to improvise. But the reason they have the ability to improvise is that they have actually practiced the basic skills over and over and over again. They know them so well in and out that you actually, they have that ability to, kind of go off script and do something a little bit different. So never have this idea that, the basics are not important. And like the joke I always make is that, people say, well, we don't really need kids to know how to spell because we've got spell check, right? And I'll say, well, you have to be in the vicinity of the word. You have to be somewhat close, right? You just slap the keys. You gotta do this. Now you can say, well, there's voice to text, all this other stuff. Yeah. And there's opportunities there as well, but there's some really basic skills. Adam Grant writes about this idea of that basically literacy, just having the ability to read and write just totally can change your life circumstances. Just that ability. And I don't have the exact quote, and maybe I'll find it and share it in the quotes down below, but it's just something that's really, really important. So I think when we're focusing on, that understanding is that when we're talking about retention, maybe Paul is talking about the basics. So I'm kind of, again, interpreting this too. But I think the other aspect of this is retention the goal. Is that the ultimate goal? And I would actually say no, it's not the goal. Understanding and really having a deep knowledge and like it's kind of the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And one of my favorite quotes, not mine, is that when you think of these two things, knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing that it would taste terrible in a fruit salad, right? You have to have an understanding of things. That is the ultimate goal. And so how do we get to that place, right? And so when I'm really kind of focusing on this, what do you do with this information, right? I want kids to be able to write a book. And if you have the ability to write a book, you have the ability to read and write, right? The goal is not just to read and write. That's the starting point. And Yang Zhao said this, that reading and writing should be the floor, not the ceiling. What is the ceiling we're aiming for? And so I think when we focus on a deep understanding of, the content and the context of what we're doing, that's when things really start to open up. And so when I read Paul's question, I thought of a blog post that I wrote years ago, and I'll share it in the link down below. And it's on the idea of taking notes versus taking a picture of notes. Which one is better? So there is a study out of Princeton, UCLA, and I'm going to read the quote from the article, and then I'm going to give some of my thoughts on this as well. So this quote goes like this, and I apologize, there's some length in here, but I want to give some context. To examine the possible advantages of longhand note-taking, researchers from Princeton and UCLA subjected students to several TED Talks, and then, after a break featuring distractor tasks designed to disrupt memory, quiz them on their recall of content. Students were equipped with either internet-free laptops or paper notebooks while they watched the talks and instructed to take notes as they normally would for class. Test questions included both factual recall, names, dates, etc., or conceptual applications of the information. Because the quantity and quality of notes have been previously shown to impact academic performance, students' notes were also analyzed for both word count and the degree to which they contain verbatim language from the talks. In general, students who take more notes fare better than those with fewer notes, but when those notes contain more verbatim overlap, the mindless dictation issue, performance suffers. As one might expect, students who watch the TED Talks equipped with a laptop were able to take down more notes since typing kicks handwriting butt in terms of speed. That's their words. However, the luxury of quick recording also resulted in the typed notes having significantly more verbatim overlap than the written ones, and this was reflected in the test scores. While laptop and longhand note takers both fared similarly on factual questions, those taking the tedious pen and paper notes had a definite edge on the conceptual questions. So while laptops allowed students to generate more notes, on average a good thing, their tendency to encourage writing down information word for word appeared to hinder the processing of information. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. So basically what they're saying is that if you write down notes versus writing them on a laptop, or even maybe even taking a picture of them, that your retention of the information is better through handwritten notes. Sure, I agree. Fine. Okay. Is the goal retention? That's the question. And so if you said to me, which one, like here's the thing that I want you to kind of understand. If the goal is retention, take notes. Is the goal understanding? Then it shifts a little bit because they're asking two different things. When we often talk, one of the things that, a lot of people talk about Hattie's research and the factors and whatever those little things are. How are they measuring learning? That's a really important question. How are they measuring learning? Are they just simply looking at if a teacher gives you information, can you regurgitate the information? Then is it just using standardized tests to measure what is effective? That doesn't necessarily mean learning. It means regurgitation. It means retention. It doesn't mean you understand the content. It's just that you can spit it back to the person evaluating you. So my argument in my article, when I talked about this quote, was how do you spend your time? So if you took notes, tediously through just listening to a lecture. I'm not saying lecture is bad, by the way. You're listening to this podcast. This is a form of lecture. There's something that you can do with this, right? So you'll never hear me say lecture is bad. That I direct instruction, not bad. I'm not saying that at all. But if you were to give me notes and I could take a picture of the notes, it's going to save you way more time than if you were writing notes from a person, right? So with that time, the saving of time, what are you doing with that information? Can I look over the information and spend more time writing about this? So you want to really get something out of this podcast? Don't just listen to it, and then actually write a blog post about it. Write some of your thoughts on it. This is where you start creating a connection to your own understanding, to your own connections and understanding and your own context of what you're doing. So that's where I would always make this argument, is the goal actually retention or understanding? And the argument I'd make is that if you can retain information, it doesn't mean you understand it. But if you actually understand information and you have the ability to manipulate it, to create your own context, then you've obviously retained it. So I think it's kind of like it's aiming for a higher bar. There's something I often share in my presentations, and it's a student, and this is, by the way, connected to curriculum objectives. There is a student who actually, there's a grade 6 science curriculum in Alberta, Canada at the time, and there's a focus on the concept of pitch, roll, and yaw. So the student actually made a video explaining the concept, teaching it to the entire world. And so actually having the ability to teach it others, this is actually another thing in Adam Grant's book. He basically talks about the ability to teach actually gives you a better understanding of the context, right? If you have to teach others, you have to know it so much better than if you just simply hold on the information. So actually having the ability to create that information, to share it with the world, actually goes beyond retention. It goes to understanding. And if that student was to ever actually be tested on that, they'll be fine. They'll be fine on this. Now, I know that you can't always, really, with the reality of classrooms, the reality of curriculum, you can't actually create videos, create context all the time. But the more you do that, the deeper the understanding of this as well. And I would say, even thinking about this, how deeply I can answer this question, because I've been writing for years, that when I read Paul's question, I could actually refer back to a blog post, look it up, and have a deep understanding. You can throw any question at me. I've probably blogged about it at some point, some aspect of it in some way. So really kind of focusing on where are we spending our time and what is the ultimate goal? Is it retention or understanding? By default, you will retain the information if you truly understand it. But if you just actually retain it without an understanding, it's going to go. It's going to go away. So again, this is so different at the elementary level versus the middle school level versus high school level, right? There's very limited knowledge that kids have, and you're building that through that process. And how do we create with it? How do we create context? So going back to Paul's original question, I think that's where are we spending our time, and do we actually have that information? So here's a little test for you. You've made it this far in the podcast. What are your thoughts? What is your understanding? What are your ideas? If you were to just hold them in your head, how much more, how much more beneficial would it be to actually comment down below, to actually write some ideas, write some thinking, and share your thoughts on this context as well. The question it's not having the question of like going back to the article, taking notes versus taking a picture of notes versus writing on a laptop. It's actually, what do you do with the information? What do you actually create? And as I said, when you have the ability to teach someone else, which I kind of am doing right now, you understand it in a much deeper level. One of my favorite quotes ever is from Joseph Joubert. He says, "To teach is to learn twice." What is your depth of understanding a concept when you get to teach the entire world, which I get to do right now? Anyways, Paul, thank you so much for the question. I hope you can share your comments, share your questions down below. I might answer them in a future podcast of
What you say?
What does
That you only meant well, 'cause
Jason
you did
Derulo.
what you said.
Jason Derulo.
That it's
What
all
does
for
George say? Da, da, da,
us.
da. Another episode. Thanks for being here. I know it's ridiculous, but just trying to have a little fun. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a wonderful day. Take care.